Chronic Lyme disease refers to a cluster of symptoms that start after the initial infection of Lyme and persist despite having received a course of antibiotic treatment that is recommended by the Infectious Disease Society of America. Some patients say that they simply don't feel cured. They don't feel the same as they did before Lyme. They experience fatigue, muscle aches, brain fog, inability to make decisions with ease, super sensitivity to light, and a lot of people even get chronic symptoms that just persist for years and years and years. The term post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome also describes this persistent infection, the persistent immune activation, and damage that did not exist before the index infection of Lyme. It affects about 5 to 20% of patients following Lyme disease and can be disabling. My guest today is Mariah Henchi, and we are going to be talking all about Lyme disease and chronic Lyme disease and why it's not always acknowledged by the medical community and how people can overcome it naturally. Dr. Myriah Hinchey is a naturopathic physician whose career has been devoted to the treatment of tick-borne illnesses, most notably Lyme disease. Her singular dedication to this specific area of medicine has endowed her with unparalleled knowledge and understanding of the intricacies surrounding chronic Lyme and other tick-borne illnesses. Throughout her illustrious career, Dr. Hinchey has touched the lives of thousands of patients afflicted by chronic tick-borne diseases, encountering diverse presentations and challenges associated with those conditions. Her clinical experience, coupled with her tireless research, ongoing study, and her personal triumph over chronic tick-borne disease, has established her as an authoritative figure in the field. In pursuit of excellence, Dr. Hinchey continually keeps abreast of the latest research, treatment protocols, and emerging therapies encompassing both allopathic and natural approaches to chronic Lyme disease. Collaborating with other esteemed experts, she actively participates in various conferences and professional events annually, constantly refining her approach to patient care. Her dedication has earned her memberships in esteemed organizations like the International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society and the Medical Academy of Pediatric Special Needs, where she frequently shares her unique insights to captivated audiences. I am so excited too because this is a topic that we have absolutely never even touched on. We have talked about Lyme, but my audience is going to be brand new to Galacon 3. So we're going to start by just kind of talking about some Lyme disease and the co-infections and why it's been ignored by the medical community for so many years and all of the things. And then we're going to dive into this brand new supplement and how it works and how it functions in the body, all of the things. So start us out by talking about Lyme and the co-infections and the relationship between the two.
Sure. So I would think most people know that, Lyme is caused by a spirochete, which is a type of bacteria. The original species is Borrelia burgdorferi, which was isolated in Lyme, Connecticut. There's definitely conspiracies around how it came about or became more prevalent, as well as, why it's not really being properly diagnosed or treated in the conventional medicine community. I don't really want to get into any of that. And I don't even know my full feelings on that. So that's like a completely different show with a different person. Basically the co-infections, there's a multitude of co-infections. And really that term just means when the tick bites the host or the animal and it takes its blood meal, it's going to really, suck out every bacteria, parasite, virus, anything else that lives inside of that host animal. And then when the tick drops off and then comes along and attaches to you later on, it's going to inject all of those bacteria, parasites, viruses, whatever was in that deer or that white-footed mouse or the chipmunk or whatever, and it's going to put it into the person. So the term co-infections really came along because they are passed along with Lyme disease. And so the co-infections are not going to show up on any Lyme disease test. And the testing for Lyme alone is already very, very troublesome and unreliable. And that's a whole nother topic as well. So, if you've been tested for Lyme disease and you're negative and you have every sign and symptom, make sure that you use, a credible lab that really specializes in testing for Lyme and tick-borne diseases. The most common co-infections are Babesia, Bartonella, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, and then there's a handful of viruses, including the Powassan virus. But there are other co-infections as well. And really the trouble is the more organisms that you have inside of your body, the more immunocompromised you're going to become, or the more dysregulated your immune system is going to be, the more inflamed you're going to be. I kind of think of straws on a camel's back, right? So the more co-infections you have, the higher your bacterial, parasitic, viral load is, the more inflamed, the more toxic, and the more dysfunctional your immune system is going to be. And then they all kind of work synergistically to help each other live there. So you're going to have a lot more symptoms, and I would say more severe symptoms, the more co-infections that you have.
I'm interested, if we have this high infectious load of all these co-infections that get deposited into you following a tick bite, where they have effectively taken it out of something else and now they're giving it all to you. It seems like a lot of these co-infections are almost, they're just on that barrier of clinical. They're a little bit subclinical. And so my curiosity is piqued as to how often does this lead to an overt sepsis or an overt, really frank presentation of an infection? Because what the conundrum and what's so befuddling is that people live years and years and years with just these low grade infections going on. And I love what you said about them all working together to live in that same space, because while we haven't talked a lot about Lyme and co-infections, we certainly have talked about the microbiome a lot on the show. And we know that the microbiome, all those healthy bacteria, also work together to survive. And so this is the dastardly opposite side of that. So what is the fundamental difference? Why are we not progressing to an overt sepsis? And why do these just kind of linger for so many years?
So I would say number one is that if they kill us, they die, right? So they don't want to kill us. They just want to rob all of our nutrients, break down the extracellular matrix, eat all of our collagen, right? So I would say that's kind of number one. I don't know. And it sounds so crazy to talk about bacteria and parasites like they're so intelligent, but they really, really are, so it's they know how to push it enough to cause major breakdown and disaster, but not actually kill us. Again, going back to the straws on the camel's back analogy. So a lot of times we can get along fine with them, but then when something happens and you get that last infection, and it's the straw that breaks the camel's back, that's when the immune system becomes so compromised that now the infections just start to multiply out of control. So a lot of people, for whatever reason, understand like acute chicken pox and then shingles. And so I kind of use this analogy to describe it with patients, because I have a lot of patients who probably have had Lyme and or co-infections for years. And it's not until something else happens that lowers their immunity, and then all of a sudden they have, their symptoms go from just, very mild to off the charts severe, and the diseases become debilitating. So it's kind of like when you have chickenpox, right? Like you have the malaise, you have the fever, you have the rash, and then chickenpox or varicella, the virus, never actually leaves the body. It stays inside of the body, but our immune system does a really good job of keeping it, from replicating. And it's not until you become immunocompromised, right, or very, very stressed out, or whatever the case may be, and then you end up with shingles, which is like that secondary infection that happens, sometimes years or even multiple decades later. So people tend to understand that analogy, so I use that a lot. So I mean, I can't even count how many patients I've had where it was after having a severe car accident, going through a terrible divorce, losing a spouse or a parent or a child, or getting COVID or getting vaccinated for COVID, or, contracting some other illness that is kind of like that straw on the camel's back that then just allows everything to go haywire because the immune system can no longer control it. Mycotoxin illness is a big one too. People live along, okay with Lyme and co-infections, then they get exposed to a water damaged building and have a mycotoxin issue, and then all hell breaks loose.
I mean, it really, in functional medicine, this is the trigger. We're looking for that triggering event, that never been well since moment. And so what you've so elegantly described so far is that we have the antecedents where we've got the Babesia, or we've got whatever parasite came along as a co-infection, but then something triggers it, and then it becomes a full blown problem. And then what do you do? Because as we've mentioned that the testing for Lyme is not great, that the false negative rate is very, very high. They're not accurate and precise tests. And neither is the treatment. The treatment is not great. So what happens when there is some sort of triggering event that then throws people into a full on, it sounds like it's not truly like an infectious state where they're running a high fever, etc. It sounds like more it's just this hyper inflamed state. Is that correct? Or is it more of the classic presentation of an infection?
So it's not a classic presentation. Once you've had it and it's disseminated and you now have like these chronic tick-borne infections, really what happens is it's a cycle between like the immune dysregulation causing the inflammatory cytokines worsening the immune dysregulation. And what happens is it ends up making the body hospitable to these infections. So the body and what is created inside of the body not only allows these organisms to survive and evade the immune system, but it actually helps them to thrive. And this really comes down to the inflammatory cytokine cascade kicked off by nuclear factor kappa beta. So nuclear factor kappa beta ignites IL-6, IL-1 beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, the MMPs, which are like the collagenases that break down collagen and feed the organism. And so a lot of this is also going to go into like why patients with tick-borne disease end up with such bad gut dysfunction. So this inflammation, it happens at every single cell in the body. And I think a lot of people don't realize that Lyme infects every single cell of the body. And so you're going to have dysfunction in all of your organs and your organ systems. And it's going to lead to what can look like, multi-system failure in the body. Mm-hmm. And so anyways, back to the gut, you're going to end up with breaking down of the tight junctions, which increases permeability. And now you're leaking toxins back in, you're letting in, undigested food or partially digested food, polypeptides in. Now you're going to create a bunch of food sensitivities. You're going to have histamine levels go up. And it's just this vicious cycle. So when I'm working with a patient, I always say, there is no one size fits all treatment protocol, because I now have to figure out what is going on inside of you as an individual. Like, how have these infections played on your genetic and physical weaknesses that have now made you have like this puzzle that we have to go in and figure out what all the pieces are. And then if we can figure out what the pieces are, we can help to make you inhospitable to the infection. We can lower the cytokine cascade. We can try to rebuild and balance the immune system while we're shrinking the infectious load, because in the end, it's our immune system that always has to either completely eradicate an infection or get it to the point where it's not replicating like into like sort of a remission. So we can use herbal or prescription antibiotics, but if we're only using antibiotics, not only are we going to mess up the microbiome, and our immune system is dependent on our microbiome, but if we only focus on killing the infection, you're never going to have a chance of eradicating it because you're not fixing the immune system.
I was just about to say the exact same thing. Like, you can use antibiotics, you can use antivirals, but you're not fixing the problem. Like, you're not reversing this inflammatory you're not reversing the inflamed state that is leading to this hospitable environment. And I mean, I love how you talked about how we have these collagenases and the breakdown in the tight junctions and this increase of histamine, et cetera. It also, I'm wondering too, are there other mechanisms that are like, that create hospitable environments that are more like walling off or creating
the biofilms?
Yes, let's talk about that.
And when we start talking about Galacton-3, because that plays a role in the biofilm formation.
Okay, well, let's talk about Galacton-3, because you have been researching its upstream role in Lyme and other inflammatory diseases. So teach us about this protein and why you think it's so important.
Sure. So it's a carbohydrate binding protein, and it's not a bad thing in an acute situation. So it acts as an alarmin. And so what that means is when you have an infection or an injury, it's going to recruit and bring in all of the immune cells that your body needs to either kill the organisms or heal the wound. And it's supposed to be short-lived. So it calls in all of the pertinent cells, and you kill and you repair and you heal, and you maybe form a scar, and then that's it. Levels are supposed to go down, and then you move on. When you have a chronic infection, it's like that fire alarm that just never gets turned off. So it's like this constant signaling of pro-inflammatory cytokines and immune cells, and it can actually lead to the breakdown of collagen and excessive amounts of fibrosis. So really, it's going to lead to inflammation, fibrosis. It plays a huge role in the progression of cancer. And it causes immune dysregulation when it has been chronically elevated. Let me think for a sec. So did I forget anything? It increases mast cells. It builds biofilms. And then also it increases the MMP9s or the collagenases, which are the enzymes that spirochetes use to break down our collagen in our joints, our tendons, our ligaments, our blood vessels, our skin, our organs, and feed, because a strand of collagen has the exact nutrient profile that spirochetes need to live. So it's interesting how these inflammatory cytokines work for the infection.
Yes, they do. They actually feed it along the way. And so we talked a little bit about these specific roles, and let's talk a little bit more about biofilms. You said that, galectin-3 can really lead to some of the creation of the biofilms, but how does Lyme disease specifically interact with galectin-3 to create the biofilms, and what happens when patients are just coated in these biofilms?
So really what happens is the biofilms, I think of them as like forts. And so really it gives a shielding, and the bacteria kind of adhere inside of them and build this biofilm around them. So if you look at the structure of galactin-3, it looks like a little sort of like C with a pole on the end of it. And that's a monomer. When it becomes activated, it turns into a pentamer. So if you picture 5 of them together, and then these little sort of like handles bind to each other and they form a lattice. So you picture that lattice, and that's what actually gives the structure to the biofilm. And then it can incorporate heavy metals and iron and a whole bunch of other things. But really what happens is it hides from the immune system. So it decreases immune surveillance.
Right. Yes, exactly. It shields itself off. That's what we were talking about just a minute ago about, like, it's like that classic aspergilloma that is so hard to treat, which is not a co-infection of Lyme, but still is another way that the body very effectively walls itself off. And I love the way that you described the galectin-3 transforming from a monomer to a pentamer, because if you think about it creating a lattice work, what we've really got is almost like a crystalline structure. And really, truly, that's what it is. And so even rocks have this exact same approach. It's just their bonds are tighter than what we're seeing in this biofilm. So, we're seeing less sticky forces, but forces nonetheless that are very similar to the exact way that rocks and crystals are put together as well. And so what are we going to do about galectin-3?
So what I do that I learned from Dr. Elias is to use a very special form of modified citrus pectin. Okay. So the form that I use is called Pectasol, and it's the only form of modified citrus pectin that is patented and has gone through this special esterification and is modified to a lower molecular weight, and that actually allows it to be absorbed. So regular modified citrus pectin is just going to stay in the gut and act as a binder. This actually gets absorbed into the bloodstream so that it can go systemically throughout the body and decrease galactin-3 levels, as well as bind heavy metals, toxins, endotoxins, which is super important when you're really trying to kill any sort of bacteria or fungus because of this Herxheimer reaction. So it allows the binding ability to come inside of the body instead of just being in the gut like it would with regular citrus pectin.
We haven't talked about what the Herxheimer reaction is on the show. Give us just a couple of sentences about this like really radical inflammatory response known as the Herxheimer reaction.
Sure. So typically, so I think it was originally sort of coined, the term was coined with killing syphilis. And so syphilis is also the cousin to Lyme disease. Or to spirochetes. They're in the same family. And basically, when you kill bacteria, they release their toxins, their LPS, which is lipopolysaccharide. And so that is actually going to ignite the release of nuclear factor kappa beta, which again is going to ignite that same inflammatory cytokine cascade that causes massive inflammation. It also causes histamine to be released. And you basically have this exacerbation of all of your symptoms, and some patients will actually get new symptoms. So in my opinion, it is very, very important to make sure that that patient is able not only to properly detoxify, but to eliminate, right? So the routes of elimination have to be working before you can get them detoxing, and they have to be detoxing before you can start killing things. And if somebody has increased intestinal permeability or leaky gut, they are not going to detoxify properly. They're just going to leak everything back in. So in my opinion, it is very important to do the things that we need to do from a functional medicine perspective to get that patient detoxing and eliminating, so that when we start killing things, they're not just reabsorbing all of these endotoxins, because that's just going to increase the inflammatory cytokine cascade and cause further immune dysregulation and make them feel worse, but also feed their infection.
You know, you've added another layer. We talk a lot about how important having open drainage pathways and being able to detoxify, but what I honestly have never really thought about in as clear a terms as you just put it, it's not only about draining the stuff out, it's about it not going through the recirculation, through all the leaky gut, through all the pathways that continue to feed the inflammation. And so, I want to learn more about this modified citrus pectin, but I would love to hear a timeline of an approach. If you've got somebody in your office who is sick as stink, inflamed, you know, as one can be, leaky gut, where do you start with those people, and then how do you progress into introducing supplements, introducing whatever that it is that you do? But how do you ensure that these drainage pathways are open and that really the leaky gut is sealed up first?
It's a long story.
I know.
I mean, I can tell you my typical approach with a patient, and maybe that will answer. So, all right. So basically, I will do a white blood cell micronutrient panel with all of my patients. Point being, you know, we are a bunch of biochemical reactions, you know, our physical body as well as our chemical bodies, right? Our neurotransmitters, our hormones, et cetera. So, you know, we eat something, we convert it from A to B to C to D. They're all enzymatic reactions. Every single enzyme is going to depend on a vitamin or a mineral cofactor. So I don't just put people on supplements willy-nilly. I find out what they are borderline deficient or deficient in, and that is what we focus on for supplementation. And, you know, obviously we want to make sure that, like, you know, phase 1 and phase 2 of their liver is detoxifying and that they're balanced so that we're not making those toxic intermediates that are even more inflammatory. We want to make sure that they have adequate amounts of, you know, methylfolate and B12 and all of the things that you need to run your methylation cycle, or you can't detox. And I mean, I could go on and on just about, you know, the micronutrient panel alone, but basically I want to replenish the things that they are not currently getting in their diet or from their current supplements. And it's a nice check too, to see if what they're taking is actually working. So I do that with almost every patient. I also do an IgG and an IgA food sensitivity panel. And through that, because basically what I'm looking for is what internally and externally is going to be causing inflammation, because inflammation feeds the infection. So if you're eating foods that you are making IgG or IgA antibodies to, you are going to be increasing inflammation. You are going to be increasing histamine as well, a lot of times, and you're going to be distracting the immune system at least. If your immune system is busy making antibodies to the foods that you're eating, then that is a drain on your immune system. In some cases, it can actually be a trigger to an overreaction and autoimmunity. So those are 2 tests that I do on every single patient. Depending on how bad their food sensitivity panel comes back, I can kind of judge what their intestinal permeability is. You know, if someone only has 1 or 2 things and they're not terrible, then I would assume that their gut is in pretty good shape. If they have a multitude of food sensitivities, then we can assume that they have increased intestinal permeability. So that's kind of like the basic groundwork that I do. I put everybody on some sort of healthy anti-inflammatory diet. I make very few blanket statements in my practice, but one is no gluten, no dairy, no sugar. If you have an infection, you should not be eating pro-inflammatory foods and sugar, because sugar is going to suppress your immune system and feed the infections. So that's like my one blanket statement. So once I've done the white blood cell micronutrient panel, I've done the food sensitivity panel, I kind of have my gut analysis, which a lot of that comes from their history. I should point out, I sit with every patient for at least an hour, if not more, and we do a very detailed history, because that's where I get most of my clues. And, a lot of patients come in and if they know they have tick-borne disease, and they've accepted that that's their underlying cause. And for years, I thought that was the underlying cause of their current state. But now I've realized it's not their underlying cause. It has created other underlying causes. And again, that's what I'm going after. Like, what are the things that are causing their inflammation, their immune dysregulation beyond the infection? Does that make sense? So I have to make sure they're detoxing, we have their inflammation under control, we're trying to balance their immune system, and we're healing their gut. So I'll kind of start there for the first 30 days. And I use a lot of herbs as well. So I might pick herbs that aren't really killers, but are going to help to modulate the inflammatory cytokine cascade. Japanese knotweed is antimicrobial, but the combination of Japanese knotweed and Chinese skullcap together actually inhibits all of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. So nuclear factor kappa beta, tumor necrosis factor alpha, IL-6, IL-1 beta, MMP9. So just those two herbs alone do a lot. It's not a complete treatment, but they do a lot. And then if you throw ashwagandha in, that helps to modulate TH1, TH2 and bring it back into balance. So now just those three herbs can do a lot. And remember, the inflammatory cytokines, and specifically MMP9, break down the collagen and feed them. So if you're blocking their ability to break down the extracellular matrix and eat our collagen, you effectively start to starve them. So you can start to make a difference just by making those changes in the beginning. And all of that is actually going to start to heal their gut. And I put everyone pretty much at that point on Pectasol, because the Pectasol is going to decrease, it decreases MMP9, it decreases interleukin 6, it decreases interleukin 1 beta. And it helps to start healing back up the tight junctions. And it also protects collagen.
The thing I like about your approach is that you're not only looking at what's the current picture, you're actually looking for all the antecedents that kind of led to this point and trying to go all the way back up to the top. Now, these inflammatory mediators that are affected by modified citrus pectin, just can you elaborate on the research that has gone into modified citrus pectin, and what is it about Pectasol that makes you believe in it so strongly?
Well, that would definitely be Dr. Elias. The many years that I spent talking to him about it.
He's such an amazingly smart, kind man who just—
He's an amazing human.
He's such a good human. Yes, absolutely. And conveys so much information just so clearly and succinctly. I love Dr. Elias. Absolutely.
Yes. So this particular Pectasol C, to my knowledge, is the only modified citrus pectin that has been studied. So I'm talking like the original has been patented. I think that it was developed like over 25 years ago. So there's a multitude of studies that have been done showing its effectiveness. There is one study, to my knowledge, on modified citrus pectin showing that it didn't do anything that it claims to do, and that it did not affect galacton 3 levels, but that was not that was not on Pectasol. That was on a different inferior type of modified citrus pectin. So this particular Pectasol, the esterification is like less than 10%. And I believe its size is like 5 kilodaltons. So it's very, very small compared to like if you were just looking at citrus pectin or even some of the other modified citrus pectins that exist. So I don't know if that answers your question.
I mean, it makes sense to me. I just want to clarify it for my audience. I mean, people are going to be like, what the heck is a Dalton? You know? And so what you're saying, what you're saying is that the esterification increases the size of the molecule, increasing the number of kilodaltons that the molecule is, increasing the likelihood that it will stay inside of the lining of the gut instead of getting into the bloodstream where we're wanting it to be, which in my understanding is that's one of the big differentiators between Pectasol and other products on the market. Is that correct?
Correct. So the Pectasol is actually going to be able to be absorbed into the bloodstream and into the body.
Yes. Okay. And now we understand why that is so important. And so how readily available is this on the market? Because when I think of like supplements that I've seen over the years, modified citrus pectin is not one of them. Like, how emerging is this research?
So it's only been on my radar for probably the past 5 years. I'm going to say maybe 6 at this point. Mm-hmm. It is the one thing besides like vitamin D and EPA DHA that I can say I literally put every single patient on that has a tick-borne disease. But I don't really know like how far back the research goes. Okay.
I mean, it makes sense that you would have people on vitamin D and EPA DHA simply for the gut healing properties of it. That's 2 of the key supplements in the 5R protocol for how we tone down leaky gut. And so this one, you know, also that's like your trifecta for people who have these Lyme infections. And so we've mentioned heavy metals a little bit as far as their incorporation into the biofilms, but I'd love to know more about how heavy metals play into the symptomatology and how maybe your approach is a little bit different in people who have heavy metal burdens alongside Lyme versus not a heavy metal burden and Lyme.
So it's interesting. So I'll start with talking about how heavy metals play a role. So the presence of heavy metals is going to suppress or alter the immune system. They actually, like I had mentioned, are part of the biofilm, so they can actually promote biofilm formation. There are some studies that show that the bacteria become more virulent in the presence of heavy metals. And so again, like this is just, you know, further ammunition here for the importance of detox. But when it comes to heavy metals, our body likes to sequester them in the fat tissue. And then obviously we just said biofilms. And I tend to think as long as they're in the fat tissue, they're somewhat safe there. So, and I, you know, this is just my opinion. I'm sure you could find several other doctors whose opinions differ, but I don't like to go gung ho trying to chelate and pull heavy metals out. Because once we move them out of the fat tissue, especially in a patient with poor detoxification and severe inflammation and leaky gut, what are we potentially doing, right? We're pulling them out, we're dumping them into the bloodstream, and now we're exposing all of our vital organs to them instead of just having them be sequestered in the fat cells. So I would rather use something very gentle like Pectasol, also chlorella, and there's a few others that just they're not really like huge mobilizers, but they're going to bind what's being released. So the biggest concern when someone has heavy metals for me is, breaking down the biofilms and releasing those heavy metals. And if you're not doing something to bind them and get them out of the body. So this is another reason why I really, really like this type of modified citrus pectin, because it takes care of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reduces the ability of the toxins to kind of re-inflame everything. And so much information here. I want you to take us out, because we're talking about Galacton-3, and we've talked a lot about Lyme, but Galacton-3 is also implicated in heart disease and kidney disease and cancer and so much else. Why does this protein have such a broad reaching potential in all inflammatory conditions? And are there other proteins that have this powerful an effect on the immune system? Or is this kind of one of the Mac Daddies of like triggering all of the inflammatory cascade?
No, I would say from what I know, this is one of the big ones. And again, like you hit the nail on the head, it's because of the inflammation. So, when someone has a tick-borne disease and they have inflammation, it's not like, oh, here's this inflammation with my tick-borne disease. It's massive. It's every cell, it's every system. And a lot of these inflammatory cytokines promote cancer growth, tumor growth, and progression. And so when the galacton-3 turns on nuclear factor kappa beta and that whole downstream effect, you're just really increasing your risk for cancer. Now, couple that with the fact that it's dysregulating your immune system, right? So now your immune system can't do its job, and you're kind of just a ticking time bomb. I hate to say that. That sounded terrible, but you know what I mean? Like down-regulate the immune system, up-regulate inflammation, and, damage, oxidative stress, right? Which these infections cause as well, decrease your inability to detoxify. And it's like the perfect storm.
I mean, it is that classic understanding of no matter what you're doing in your life, you're either walking towards disease or away from disease. And if you have this body that the gun's already loaded with loads and loads and loads of inflammation, it's just a matter of time until you hit that triggering event. It's just a matter of time. And so I completely get it. And it is harsh kind of to say it's like a ticking time bomb, but I really think that we all need to hear it. And it reminds us that we show up every day to either walk towards the disease or away from it. So, Mariah, it has been so great to get to talk to you here today. And I think you have just showered us with so much information that probably very few of our audience members have ever heard. So thank you for doing this research and really getting out there and helping people who are marginalized because of their, quote, fake Lyme disease, truly heal and truly eliminate all of these co-infections and resolve all the antecedents that got them there in the first place. I absolutely love your approach. And it is so good to be seeing an evolution in medicine where people are truly remembering the heart of medicine and the heart of pharmacy, which is the empathetic care of patients and like truly trying to figure out what's going on with patients instead of kind of the factory mill-based approach that we've had for so many decades. So listeners, go and check it out. And if you would like some modified citrus pectin, go and check out Pectasol, because I know I love it. Do you take it every day? I'm sure you do. Every single day.
Sure do. It's anti-aging.
Yeah. Oh, see, there you go. There you go. And so this is a powder. It's kind of it's a flavor. It's, it is what it is. And so how do you dose it to make it like as palatable and as enjoyable as you can?
So interestingly, you can get it as a lime flavored powder that actually tastes like limeade. We actually call it limeade with the kids that we treat because I hide their herbal medicine in there.
Yeah.
For adults, we call it a limerita. But anyways, that one is very, very tasty. They do also have, like, I believe, orange flavored chewables. And then they have capsules too. So there's actually a multitude of different preparations for it. I personally like the lime powder. With my Lyme patients, no pun intended, we do a scoop 3 times a day. That's kind of like the cancer and the severe infection dose. Myself, I take like 1 scoop a day, sometimes 2, depending.
All right. All right. Well, we just got down another rabbit hole, so I will say thank you once again, and let's chat again soon because it has been such a joy to get to know you today.
Thank you. It's been great talking with you too. Thanks for having me.
If you've been looking to balance out your immune system as well as create appropriate inflammatory responses, I want you to learn about Pectasol from EcoNugenics. Pectasol is a super nutrient for total body health. It can deliver immune modulating ingredients that help to optimize our immune system, helping it to work smarter and not harder. It also blocks the activity of Galacon 3, which allows our body to have a healthy inflammatory response. It is critical that Pectasol provides citrus pectin, which helps with optimal aging. It helps with cellular activity as well as detoxification from heavy metals like mercury, lead, and arsenic. It also is a very beneficial ingredient for cardiovascular health, protecting the heart muscle, as well as supporting healthy blood pressure and balancing out cholesterol. Go to econugenics.link/Lindsay Elmore and you can save 15% off of your order when you shop the code Lindsay15. Pectasol is unlike any other supplement that I have ever used. Total body benefits from modified citrus pectin, all in one easy to take form. You can choose between capsules, powders, or chewables. Pectasol modified citrus pectin can help to rejuvenate every part of your body. Head over to econugenics.link/Lindsay Elmore and shop the code Lindsay15 to save 15% on your order.